All right, great. Jennifer, it's great to chat with you. It's under different circumstances than we otherwise would have expected because we'd probably be having a conversation like this in DC at LibertyCon rather than virtually, but I hope you're holding up well in the quarantine.
I'm doing great, and I
Okay.
want to let everybody know who is listening to us that I'm talking with David Clement, who is the Director of External Relations at Students for Liberty. Is that still correct?
Yes, that is. Yep.
Okay. I know we're all wearing different hats during
Yes.
usual times, so that you're probably doing a lot more than that. And I am CEO of the Atlas Society,
Hmm.
and this is our first experiment with Ask the Atlas Society. As David mentioned, we were all excited about going to LibertyCon and exhibiting there and speaking there, and Students for Liberty has been a wonderful partner of the Atlas Society going back decades. But since we have an unusual set of circumstances, we wanted to take this opportunity to connect virtually and
Yep.
talk a little bit about the philosophy of Ayn Rand and what it has to say about how we respond both individually and as society, communities, and a government.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there are so many interesting facets that I think the ideas of Rand can kind of be overlaid, or viewing this pandemic through that lens of the philosophy of objectivism. So I'm excited to ask you a few questions in terms of where the ideas of Rand fit into the role of the state here, and things like that. So I'll get started actually. I mean, with the first and most obvious question, which is, what would Ayn Rand have to say about what's going on right now with the pandemic, the complete shutdown, or almost complete shutdown of the American economy? Where do you kind of see the lens of objectivism in terms of this pandemic?
Well, there are two lines that jump out at me from Atlas Shrugged. And the first is sort of a gloomier line, which was, "Brother, you asked for it." Um, and
Okay.
the the other is a sunnier line, which
Yep.
was, "It's we who move the world, and it's we who will pull it through." So along the gloomier lines, of course, that was Francisco's, putting that up on the towers in New York.
Yep.
Um, we're talking about, like, where did this virus come from? How did it get out of hand? How did we get here? And
Hmm.
so, as you guys know, you guys have been great in sharing our Draw My Life videos. We're working on a Draw My Life. My name is coronavirus. And so,
Okay.
in thinking about the story of the virus uh, and where it came from and how it spread and who helped and who hindered along the way.
Hmm.
The virus has one job, and that job is to spread. And
Yep.
it started in apparently these bat caves in Wuhan province. It jumped to these wet markets,
Hmm.
and then it spread. Now, how did it spread? Well, it not only bred well in these wet caves, but it also breeds well in secrecy.
Yeah.
And the Chinese government at first suppressed the truth about what was happening. There were doctors, and we've started a gallery of heroes and villains of the coronavirus. And
Hmm.
one now fallen hero was a doctor who discovered it and tried to warn other medics, and he got a visit from the police, and
He
he was
was the original whistleblower, correct?
that's exactly right.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
he saw this. I think his name was Dr. Li Wen Liang,
Yep.
and he was ordered by the police to go back to work.
Yep.
And some people don't know this, but we need to let them know he was infected. He likely infected others, and he
Yep.
died.
Yeah.
Okay, and so while the virus was focused on spreading, okay,
Yep.
uh, the, the, the communist government was focused on preserving its power. So
On
not
saving face and trying not to. Yep.
exactly preserving power, preserving prestige.
Yep.
And so instead of doing, if there is a job for government protecting individuals, being transparent,
Hmm.
it suppressed the truth. We have another video just out, My Name is Hong Kong, where there's interesting parallels of the government suppressing freedom of expression. Well, what could be a more important freedom of expression than a doctor saying that we
Yeah.
have a problem here? In the
Yep.
process, it spread not just to in China, but it started to make its global spread, and we can see other instances of wrong government, priorities. There's a
Yep.
reason why it is spread so far and fast in Iran, which is one of communist China's most important trading policies. Okay,
Hmm.
so again, what happened with government? There was the fact that so many of the best minds of Iran had already fled
Yep.
during their revolution, and the mysticism and authoritarianism of that government prevented. It was mysticism, not merit, who was
Yep.
determining who would be the best doctors, the best scientists. So half of the population, the women of Iran, were not brought, those human resources were not brought to bear on the problem.
Yep.
Say
It's
similar,
you.
yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead.
It's with Iran. It's interesting because it's there. Obviously, what goes on there in terms of oppression is horrific. But you raise a very good point. There are unseen externalities when you completely shut out the creative power of half your population and you keep them on the sidelines. And when I say keep them, I mean women in many instances. And so that's an important point in terms of the creative power that can be used and harnessed and our ability to find solutions when we allow for humans to flourish in that way and have the ability to try and solve some of these complex problems. So I'm certainly interested to see how your heroes and villains shakes out because that's a really interesting way of looking at it. Because I mean there are so many heroes. I mean if we talk domestically in the United States, from the obviously the people who are still working in hospitals and trying to save lives, but also all the way down the chain to the maybe uh, less glorious jobs of driving a truck and making sure that these goods and food and all these things that people need are ending up on these store shelves, or even as something as simple as the Uber Eats driver who is bringing you your meal at night because you're getting it delivered to your door. There are so many people who deserve applause in that sense, and so I love the idea of highlighting those heroes and villains.
Yeah, I that resonates with me. So anyway, I'm in San Francisco right now. I'm sheltering with my parents, and I
Yep.
drove from Malibu, and I'm stopping to charge my car here and there, and at some point I'm in a Marriott in the middle of nowhere, and I'm ordering some takeout, while I'm charging, and I decided I paid for it, but then I gave a 200% tip, and I wrote on my check, "You
Yep.
are the real heroes," because
Yep.
these were people that were, that the only thing that was open was, this just corner of a restaurant, and they
Hmm.
were busy, and they were doing service with a smile, and they were wiping things down, and I mean, that's capitalism.
Hmm.
Those are people that are working, and so I do think I get a little bit concerned. If I was a virus, okay, yes, I would be thinking about how I can spread short term,
Sure.
but I would also be thinking about how I can spread long term. And
Yep.
how I can do that is by, knowing that my true adversaries are the John Galls. They are the inventors. They are the creative men and women that have defeated one disease after another throughout
Hmm.
history, and they get their capital from our free market economy. So
Yep.
a virus that cripples the economy will mean no future cures, no future inoculations, no
Yep.
future job, no future America.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I mean that segues very nicely. You've mentioned some of the villains and how a virus can spread in secrecy. I've pulled up this tweet in front of me, and even reading it now, it strikes me as just I'm astounded that it still exists. And this is from the World Health Organization, from the 14th of January, saying preliminary investigations conducted by Chinese authorities have found no clear evidence of human-to-human transmission of the novel coronavirus identified in Wuhan province. And so just imagine the the opportunity that was missed by this secrecy, by whether we call it corruption or saving face or however you frame it. It's clear here that the Chinese Communist Party is a significant villain in allowing for the virus to spread, like you said, basically via secrecy or deception.
Yes, and what I have reflected upon is that just as the virus incubated and began in these wet caves of the Wuhan province, it has also nestled and incubated in red tape here in the administrative state in
Hmm.
America. Because
Yep.
again, okay, one job, CDC, all right, one job.
Yep.
Just focus on infectious diseases. What were they doing? One thing I say, and this is also true in our personal lives as well as our political lives, a choice to do one thing is a choice not to do another thing. So
Yep.
that while the CDC was focused on, imaginary epidemics of guns and fake, threats of vaping, and
Sure.
that's where they were getting their positive press, right? So,
Yep.
the Pavlovian, they're going to do more of that. They were taking their eye off the ball, doing just one thing, okay? Come up with competent threats. And not only that, worse, is that when there were other heroes like Helen Chu, in Washington State,
Hmm.
who it wasn't her job, okay, but she found a test and she was starting to test people. And now the regulators were saying, no, you're not allowed to do that. Well, she is yet another unsung hero of
Hmm.
coronavirus because she stood up to the regulators and she tested. And in the process, she denied untold numbers to the virus in the
Yep.
Northwest country.
Yeah, and there's really infuriating examples of people who have capital who want to use it to make protective equipment, whether it be masks or any of the other things that are needed. And I remember one person who had basically tweeted saying that they were ready via 3D printing. They had the designs; they could be full service within a matter of 2 or 3 days to start producing this equipment. And they were told by regulators that it was probably going to take about 45 days to get approval. And so here you have people who have figured out a means to help us find a solution and help us save lives. And the administrative state is standing in the way. And it's just atrocious to think that literally paperwork is what's preventing people from saving others or possibly finding a cure.
Yeah, and so we have the fact, the biological fact of the virus. We have the fact of government shutdowns. We have the sad fact of the massive expansion of the federal government, which will likely, in some ways, be permanent, and all of
Mhm.
the spending will, another great line from Ayn Rand is paid for by whom? Well, it will be paid for by you,
Yeah.
David. It will be paid for by your students. It won't be
Yep.
paid, for by other generations. You can expropriate all the wealth that you want. There isn't
Yep.
enough. It will be paid by the young people who have their best earning years ahead of them, and those are the people like your students. But so those are facts. Those are depressing. But depression is bad for the immunity. Panic. No one makes good choices in panic.
Hmm.
Fear is paralyzing, and reality exists. A is A. I mean, that's what we were talking about with the spread of the virus in China. The fact, all of the concept, you can evade a reality, but you can't evade the consequences of avoiding reality.
Yep.
Well, another reality gives us a lot of reason for optimism, and that is the resilience of the free market system. The fact that we have so many brilliant minds, scientific, entrepreneurial, and others who are working in a way we had never seen before. We have these technologies, again, thanks to capitalism, like this platform on which we're communicating right now.
Yep.
And solutions are being shared, at light speed across platforms. We are crowdsourcing solutions. We are
Yep.
finding ways to find community and to connect in isolation. And a little bit of gratitude for capitalism, I think, is in order.
Yep. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, you see, especially if you're on Twitter, you'll see people being like, "Well, this is an example of the failures of capitalism," and it's like, hold on a second, what world are you looking at? There are, like, we're going back to whether it's the Uber driver or the person who wants to change production at one of their facilities, or the endless list of people who are either actively trying with their capital to make a difference, or who are waiting and dealing with red tape in the administrative state to basically join the fight. There's a long list of counter examples to what those in the Twitter sphere might be saying, where it's like, no, no, guys, there is a lot of good here, and much of this good is being driven by the fact that people who are free and free to use their intelligence or creativity and their labor as they see fit are working together to find a solution. And so I try and, as much as I can, um, highlight those and draw those parallels, which actually brings me to my second question for you, which is, in terms of the parallels that we can draw from Rand's books in the current situation, what parallels do you see? What book of Rand's do you think is the most relevant right now?
Well, that's a really good question. In I know I've talked a little bit about Atlas Shrugged, and I think there are, clear parallels, because the bottom line of Atlas Shrugged was, who is the one who is the Atlas? Who is the
Hmm.
one who is holding up the world? Who is the one who moves the world, who pulls it through? And it's not the government, it's not incompetent central planners. Although, in times of national emergency, we have marshaled national force, and we need to have an appropriate, proportionate response in light of the complete bungling of the first line of defense, which was detection.
Yep.
But I guess I'd say, since we are all sheltering in place, I'm more reminded of Anthem. And,
Hmm.
you know, again, shout out to Students for Liberty for helping to distribute our adaptation of Anthem, the graphic novel. And it's not just, again, in terms of its societal effects of a civilization, destroyed by envy, by greed, properly understood as the desire for the unearned. But it was also about, think about what the hero accomplished in not just, lockdown, at the bottom of this tunnel.
Hmm.
He discovered, rediscovered electricity. He rediscovered, the word I. So I think, to me, as we look at what's happening, we look at what is happening that is out of our control, we can also focus as individuals on what is in our control. I had tweeted out earlier, thinking back to Sir Isaac Newton, and during the London plague of
I was just going to bring that up.
1665, which
Yep.
decimated like a third of that city's population. He
Yep.
came up. He used that time. He was self-quarantined. He used that time to come up with some of his greatest contributions to calculus and to
Hmm.
physics. Well, so the challenge is, how do we use our time in the tunnel? How do we use our time in isolation.
Hmm.
Do we make a bad situation worse? And in my experience, having been through, a disaster or two,
Yep.
house burned down,
Yep.
I've lost jobs. Do just know every single bad situation can be made worse, and it depends on your choices. Do you use this time, just to veg out and to freak out, or do you use this time to write, to do something positive,
Hmm.
to to be creative? I did 3 Draw My Life scripts in the past um, 2 weeks.
Yep.
And we came up with this way of communicating and getting this message to students. So we can show kindness, we can show benevolence, we can reach out, we can offer assistance, which is in our rational self-interest, build relationships rather than tear other people down.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, on that note, in terms of how people can react, this is obviously a terrible situation and it's certainly trying for a lot of people. What are your thoughts on what each of us can do as individuals, and in particular our students? What can or should they be doing right now? I know you've mentioned a couple of those, and the reason why I ask this is Rand's ideas puts the individual in the forefront and being kind of paramount to the human experience. So, what can our students as individuals do in these trying times, um, in terms of getting through this and not making bad situations worse?
Yes. Well, gosh, of all of the things that I think that the students could be doing, maybe reading Ayn Rand, maybe reading that Ayn Rand book that you haven't yet read, or maybe rereading Ayn Rand. In
Yep.
other words, working on your mind,
Yes.
okay? Strengthening your mind, using reason, being productive, making a list, also identifying, if you are finding that you are panicking more than maybe other people are. And there's a spectrum of people that are suffering,
Hmm.
uh, uh, different levels of anxiety. If you're finding that you are kind of your anxiety is getting out of control, I would maybe write it down and keep it in mind, because
Hmm.
that's something that you're going to want to address. Now would be a good time, or in the future, whether it's
Hmm.
going to be through treatment, or through hopefully not medication, but or through some kind of support group,
Sure.
because this is not the last existential threat.
Of
Okay,
course.
this is not the this is not the last virus. This is not the last. There's terrorist attack. I'm not saying this is a terrorist attack, but there will be other things that will happen. There will be other things that feel like existential threats to you.
Hmm.
So I think that having the proper philosophy, having the proper virtues, which are not,
Hmm.
again, just things that you have them or you don't. You work on them, you develop them, you try every day to use your values. So focusing on reason, focusing on benevolence,
Hmm.
uh, focusing on productivity,
Hmm.
and focusing on achievement. And you may be this may be your moment. This may be your moment. I just I talked to some of my friends at some of the papers. They are seeing their submissions, at different. They're going up. Um, by an order of 3. So that's
Yep.
good. That means that some people are using their time to
Yep.
write your screenplay, write your use other platforms, and build your relationships. Call people. Those relationships. It's not just what gives meaning to life, but I have found in my personal experience, and certainly in my career,
Hmm.
the fact that I had good friends, they're all in Washington now, and I maintain those relationships. It not only enriches my life by having those relationships, but it certainly helped me as I advanced in my career. So
Yep.
take a moment right now to reach out to somebody, to build your relationship, because it is meaningful, because it's the right thing to do, but also because you, we, you need trading partners in life, and be a
Yep.
good trader, be a person of integrity, be a person with something to offer, And just if you're just monitor your time, keep a time diary, keep a gratitude diary. I
Yep.
also find trying to find things to be grateful for, not just because well, it's makes you feel better, which it does,
Sure.
but but it also is in terms of being a rational individual who is productive,
Hmm.
and not panicking, having a sense of, well, I am grateful for X, Y, and Z. I have these three things. I lost these five things.
Yep.
Okay. I'm an astronaut and my spaceship is broken and I can't get back to Earth. You find one or two things that are working and you just kind of focus on those and you build a sense of agency. And that will give you the self esteem and the self confidence that you need to find the other things or build the other things that you need to get home.
Yeah, and I think that's been the one big thing. When you're in isolation like this, it is inherently antisocial, and yet the creative capacities of all of these brilliant people have allowed for us to overcome that antisocial circumstance and be very social. We can be time zones apart, thousands of miles apart, and have a conversation like this and broadcast it to the world. We can play games. The other day, we were playing with family. We were playing basically like a version of charades. So still being able to have those moments, although not physically with each other, but still being able to overcome that antisocial circumstance with all of these amazing services, products. I mean, something as trivial as an app. We talk about the heroes and villains. There's all sorts of apps out there now that allow for you to play these games in real time and still see each other. So not just like video games where you don't see each other, where you have everything connected and you can see their reactions in real time, like you and I, while playing Monopoly or Risk or charades or anything. And so there's lots of opportunities to continue to have those relationships and continue to have those conversations. And I mean, I'm super thankful for you having this conversation with me. I know that it's going to be a good for our listeners. And thank you.
Thank you, David. And I'm glad you're also having fun because that,
Yes.
is the moral purpose of your life to be happy. So I'm glad to hear you're doing it.